examiners, I'm Jia Hui and here are my group mates, Ilam Su, Sean, Kai Cheng Go, and I will be covering questions 1 and 4, followed by Ilam in question 2 and Sean in question 3. Lastly, question 5 by all of us. So as shown on the slide, question 1 to 5, this is what we'll be covering on our presentation today. So question 1 is about introduction. So AIG's heavy investment in CDS, also known as credit default swaps. So such investments in CDS actually led to massive losses during the 2008 financial crisis as mortgage defaults surged. So facing such a bankruptcy, the US government actually intervened with a 182 billion bailout, sparking controversy over the moral hazard. So during such a backlash, AIG survived, repaid its debts, and reignited debates over the financial regulation.
One of the key derivative products that fueled financial instability during the crisis was the CDS. Initially designed to protect investors from mortgage-backed securities and MBS defaults, CDS instead encouraged excessive risk-taking. AIG, a major CDS seller, issued vast amounts of these contracts but lacked the reserves to cover potential losses. When the housing market collapsed, AIG faced overwhelming margin calls it couldn't meet, triggering a severe liquidity crisis. The opacity of the CDS market make it impossible for investors and regulators to access risk exposure, hence increasing uncertainty. Because CDS contracts is also linked to multiple financial institutions, AIG's crisis had the potential to trigger a chain reaction of defaults, deepening the financial meltdown. Next, several factors has also worsened the impact of CDS during the financial crisis. First, the lack of the transparency. CDS were traded over the counter, not on public exchanges, making risk exposure difficult to access. This uncertainty destabilized financial institutions. Second, excessive speculation. Unlike traditional insurance, CDS allowed multiple investors to bet on the same asset, vastly inflating financial risk. And finally, interconnectedness. AIG's inability to meet its CDS obligations threatened the global financial stability. As AIG near collapse, systemic risk surged, forcing the US government into a $182 billion bailout to prevent a full-scale market breakdown. Ultimately, CDS, intended as a risk management tool, became a major driver of financial instability due to speculation, lack of oversight, and excessive exposure.
So here are some of the failures that AIG have faced. Firstly, underestimation of counterparty and systemic risk, flawed risk model, inadequate stress testing, lack of capital reserves, mispricing of risk, and lastly, complexity, weak regulatory oversight. So firstly, we'll be touching on underestimation of counterparty and systemic risk. So AIG assumes subprime mortgage defaults will be isolated, failing to account for the broader financial collapse. Their flawed models ignored interconnected markets, leading to liquidity issues and a domino effect throughout the financial system. So for flawed risk model and inadequate stress testing, AIG's model relied on past data, assuming housing prices would keep rising. However, stress tests failed to consider simultaneous real estate declines and rising defaults, leaving AIG unprepared for massive losses with no contingency plans. For insufficient capital reserves and mispriced risk, AIG sold vast amounts of their CDS without sufficient reserves. They underestimated mass defaults and mispriced risk, offering CDS contract at low premiums. This left them unable to absorb market losses or meet obligations. And lastly, for complexity of financial instruments and regulatory gaps, AIG's financial products like the CDS and CDOs were highly complex and poorly understood. Weak oversight allowed excessive risk-taking and outdated instruments, leaving AIG vulnerable. The lack of regulations worsened the financial crisis.
So question 4 is about what we have learned from this article. So there are 3 lessons to be learned. So firstly is preparation, followed by avoiding taxpayer-funded bailouts. Thirdly is concluding by moral hazard. So preparation would be having effective laws and regulations in place with structured bail-ins to control economic shocks with proactive planning. So followed by avoiding taxpayer-funded bailouts. So bailout should be limited, temporary, and only granted to solvent institutions to reduce taxpayer reliance. Lastly, concluding off with addressing moral hazard. Risk protection may encourage hasty, reckless behavior, but research on its impact remains inconclusive.
These are some of the key takeaways from the theme. So if I were the senior executive at AIG, I would have insisted on independent risk audits instead of relying on flawed credit ratings. I would have advocated for greater transparency and a more cautious approach to transaction to ensure long-term stability and safeguard investor confidence.
Me as a senior, I'll reinforce stricter credit issuance, raising risk limits for large loans such as $500 and above. Stricter tests will require pay slips, ID documents, and bank statements to verify repayment ability.
So as for me, if I were in a senior risk management role at AIG, I would enforce stricter risk controls, improve stress testing, and ensure sufficient capital reserves to cover potential losses. I would have taken a more cautious approach to the CDS and considered the impact of systemic risk. When managing the firm's transaction, I will prioritize long-term stability, diversification, and risk mitigation, applying stricter controls than I would in personal trading, where there is more flexibility for calculated speculations.
With that, thank you examiners for your kind attention.